The first casualty of war is the truth, and so perhaps it shouldn't be a surprise that Trump's global trade war has begun with a long list of misleading statistics. Madagascar, for example, does not charge 93% tariffs to US goods. It's closer to 20% on most products. It does, however, report a significant trade deficit with high poverty levels and weak infrastructure. Perhaps it shouldn't be a surprise that there is a limited market for US goods. Meanwhile, international demand for raw produce, especially vanilla, is at an all-time high. In contexts like this, it's difficult to understand how Trump's new 47% tariff on Madagascar is reciprocal. It seems more like punishing a developing nation for not having a strong middle-class consumer base and for growing a cash crop. None of this is a threat to the United States. Beyond these trade deficits, a minimum value of 10% has been applied, even to countries who have a trade surplus with the US, like UK or Australia. Now, partly this document is propaganda directed at Trump's support base. Tariffs in reality are always complex and can vary from different sectors. The EU, for example, imposes fairly low tariffs on US cars, around 10%, but charges over 40% tariffs for many US food imports. Meanwhile, the US imposes just 2.5% tariffs on EU cars, but 25% specifically on pickups. So whilst this short tariff summary from Trump is something anyone can understand, it may well give trained economists a heart attack. However, it does seem to be an actual policy tool as well. The UK's charm offensive on Trump has been rewarded with just 10% tariffs. In fact, as JD Vance recently remarked, Trump may well see a kindred spirit in the British and Canadian governments. Like America, the UK has suffered at the hands of globalization, importing cheap labor through immigration and exporting its factories and manufacturing infrastructure. Decisions, Vance argues, which have led to the collapse in British, American, and Canadian economic productivity. And so Trump's vision is to somehow recapture that golden age of American industry and growth. A period of time where government tariffs protected the titans of US industry, roughly from the 1860s to the 1920s. For Trump and Vance, things started to go wrong after World War II and the opening up of the US to free trade. In 2024, American tariffs were at their lowest in history. But Vance's potted history doesn't quite work. The UK, for example, built its 19th century empire on aggressive free trade practices, not tariff protectionism. Its advantage was technological: guns, ships, and factories. Leaving this aside, Trump's core argument does have some strengths. It would have been more accurate for him to hold up a graph showing the competing beneficiaries of globalization. The biggest winners over the past 40 years have been the Asian middle classes and the richest 1%. The West and lower middle classes have benefited the least in terms of real income gains. They can, however, buy cheap MAGA hats made in China. So although Trump's base is going to suffer as a result of these tariffs, the longer-term Trumpian logic is that they will benefit from a healthier internal US economy with more jobs and stronger industry. And beyond this restructuring idea lies another concern for the Trump government: the US's spiraling budget deficit, which now hits about $2 trillion a year. Musk's promise to cut the equivalent in waste through Doge has failed to materialize. It's much easier for Trump to make other countries pay to fill in that funding gap instead of raising taxes in the USA. Now, all of these things are unconventional at best. Whilst globalization has its downsides, most economists would argue that ignoring it is a recipe for disaster. Rather than fighting these planetary economic forces, it would be better to adapt and find a niche to exploit within the system, like Taiwan, for example, which is a world-leading manufacturer of computer chips. The question is whether Trump is being transactional or transformational, reflected one economist. Is he really prepared to go through the transitional pain of this, or is this just a transactional lever for extracting concessions from trade partners? Once you start to see the list as a series of strong starting positions for trade negotiations, things start to make a bit more sense. This is certainly how the EU has interpreted the situation, with President von der Leyen saying she deeply regretted the US move and it's not too late to address concerns through negotiations. The bizarre inclusion of small islands like Réunion, which receives a different tariff to France, or the uninhabited McDonald Islands, perhaps makes more sense in the context of setting out an intimidating negotiating position. Or perhaps they're just there to get people talking. Trump loves it when people talk about him. Overall, Trump's tariff list is 3 things at the same time: a propaganda win, a policy vision, and a starting price in a negotiation. It is not, however, an accurate reflection of global economics, which unfortunately is how many people will read it. Hi, it's Arthur. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe.